I'm starting the recording, and I shall begin. So welcome everyone. Thank you so much for coming to my talk on an introduction to sustainable graphic design. I've tried to keep it as action-packed in terms of dense information as possible. We're going to be covering a bunch of different topics ranging from why you should care about graphic design to actionable things you can take, actionable steps you can take with your clients in your own work, and just talking about materials and everything like that. As a very brief background, the work that we do as a studio focused on sustainable graphic design, recently has been work with alternative proteins. So creating plant-based, creating brands for plant-based meats, such as aquaculture foods, which they have a seafood alternative that's made entirely out of fungi, which is pretty cool. And edible is made entirely out of starches that you can just eat your ice cream and then eat the spoon. And then an alternative milk that is made basically chemically identically to normal milk, but it's made in a bioreactor instead of actually using real cows, which is pretty cool. So this is the space that we found ourselves working in and trying to help our clients to be able to make more sustainable choices when possible. One of the things I always like to start off with any of these presentations is really talking about how I used to sort of perceive my role as a designer when I first started. When I first started, I was really just focusing on doing brands for anyone, really, design, business cards, a lot of trade show materials. And, I would have clients come to me, I would get a request, I would do the design, so a business card, a pull-up banner, whatever it was, a logo. And then, the client would sign off of it, and then I would send it to the printer. Maybe I would talk to the printer being hey, what kind of stock should the business card be on? But also I kind of usually just pick some defaults, and then, it turned out fine. And then the end result was printed, and that was pretty cool. And then I didn't really think about what happened to it after I gave it to the client or anything like that. And eventually, as this was in 2016 or so, there started being more news about climate crisis, and it was honestly kind of scary as a young person in the world, seeing that the world is heading for huge changes to our climate ecosystems. And I really wanted to make a difference, feel like I was making a difference, reduce my own sort of impact on the planet through my own lifestyle. And I started doing that with a low waste lifestyle and stuff, but then I felt like I wanted to do more. And so I started looking at design and how that could be something that was also sustainable. There wasn't a lot of information at the time, so I ended up doing a lot of independent research. And oh no, is the sound off for anyone else? I can double check my settings. I will keep talking, but please let me know if the sound is off, because I will fix it. So, okay, let me just quickly check my settings. Microphone, let's change it.
How is this? Does that sound better?
Yes, 100%.
Okay, great. Okay, sorry about that, everyone.
Oh, don't worry.
Okay. So as I started to learn more about sustainable graphic design, I realized that really there's a lot of areas that I, as a designer, could make different choices in. So as I started to build out my research, I created this framework, which is really about all the choices that are being made along the way for sustainable design. And this extends from natural resource responsibility, so that's forestry practices, paper manufacturing, the transportation. Each time you choose a paper stock, you are making decisions about how these things happen, whether or not that stock is sustainable, where did the paper, who made the paper stock, how sustainable are they as a paper company, where did it come from, how far did it travel to get to you. You're making decisions about what kind of printer you work with, what the production responsibility is like, what kind of materials are being used for your full project, what kind of print shop protocols they have at the printer for being sustainable or not, and the different kinds of print specifications that you do. And then, of course, once the end result is created and passed to the client, what happens to that? So being able to understand a little bit more about life cycle responsibility, and recycling rates and like what happens to that business card after it goes to a trade show and gets handed off to someone. Obviously, we can't know the exact details for everything, but we can be able to understand the lay of the land, so to speak, and like be able to make better choices to help increase recycling, for example. It's in my opinion that because designers are that middle point between the client and the printer, that we have a really unique opportunity to be able to shape a better future for ourselves, a better future for the planet, and honestly, a better future for our clients financially as well. By being able to position ourselves as experts, not just in the design and the printing, but also in the materials, we're offering a lot of value to our clients, and our clients trust us. And so it's really kind of a cool opportunity to be able to present them different ideas. You might not succeed all the time, but even bringing up the conversation is a huge step forward. The truth is that the physical designs and the things that we create, they have a life before we create them, and they have a life after we create them. It's often commonly misunderstood that because paper comes from trees, which are a renewable resource, then therefore they must all be green. But unfortunately, it's not as simple as that, which we'll get into in the presentation. And often designers don't think about what happens to things after they create them. And so basically my framework for sustainable design is just to be able to consider these pieces and how we can make better choices about them. The truth is that the choices for these things are being made whether or not we pick a templated option with a standard paper stock or not. The default choices are being made regardless. So we can actually have some say in that, which is cool. And the sad truth is that most of the design work we create will end up in the landfill or the ocean, even if it's paper. This sucks. There isn't a lot we can do about it. Fortunately, it is a systemic issue regarding recycling, but we can make choices that will increase recycling rates. Much of the problem with the systemic issue is that 91% of plastics aren't recycled. I'm sure this is a familiar stat to many people, but it's really unfortunate that really only numbers 1 and number 2 with the little triangle on the bottom of plastic, those are the ones that are being recycled, and the rest, unfortunately, there's just not economic viability to recycle them. Recyclers may take the plastics, but if they don't have a market to sell them into, or they're too difficult to process, then they won't be recycled and they end up in landfill. As a result, there are more microplastics in the ocean than there are stars in the Milky Way. This is a beautiful statement, but also a really grim one. So I like to include it because often conversations around plastic in the ocean is discussed with the Great Pacific Garbage Patch and sort of this mound of plastic that exists there as if we could physically see it. But unfortunately, most of the plastics that are in the ocean and in the land are actually so tiny that we can barely see them. And you can really only understand the full scope if you take a very thin net through the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, which really just looks like blue ocean. But then when the net comes up, you can see just the true extent of the plastics. Quite depressing. And as sure as we all know, our planet is literally in crisis. I'll talk about this later, but I don't think design is going to solve the problem. There's always that meme of designers are going to save the planet and everything, but I don't think that's realistic. But I do think that we all have a role to play, and that we can have actually a lot of impact with our clients and making better choices, and just really kind of ripple effect. The more we can discuss this, the more we can normalize it, the better. So I'm going to move into the section of the presentation that is basically a crash course in unsustainable extraction and design. These are the reasons why you should care, why the choices we make are important, and why even though we can't necessarily make huge change systemically, choosing recycled business cards isn't going to stop oil extraction, but why it's still important to understand the kinds of externalities is the word I'm looking for, the kinds of externalities that design has that often aren't considered. So basically my framework is that we all should understand these things in order to make better choices, and that just being aware is sort of the first step to understanding what we can do better. So the first section is just unsustainable extraction of important forest ecosystems. So as much as it's nice that trees are renewable, unfortunately, ancient and old growth forests, trees that are 500, 1,000 years old, these trees are actually being deforested to make things like guitars and toilet paper and paper. It's not a very pleasant truth. This is a photo actually recently from British Columbia, where I live, where we have these amazing old growth forests. But these large trees are extremely profitable for lumber agencies, and so they actually prioritize them if they're allowed to. This is also a systemic issue with government allowing them to cut down those trees, but that is kind of a different fish to fry, so to speak. But ultimately, there are certifications and things we can look for to avoid this. So unfortunately, just something being made from a renewable resource isn't enough. The second is petrochemical exposure via plastics creation and destruction. This one is a bit of the furthest reaching externality, but when we choose to work with plastics, to put laminates on our business cards and other plastic associated elements to do with printing, it's important to be aware that that does increase demand for the plastic, and that does harm communities. A lot of petrochemical plastics, chemical plants where they create the plastics, as well as areas where they burn the plastics that they can't be recycled or can't be landfilled, are in communities of color across North America, and those communities have rates of cancer up to 50 times higher than everywhere else. Unfortunately, we can't really do much about this, but I think it's still important to bring it into the conversation and be aware that even if you are in a situation where you have to use a plastic, just knowing about it, we can't raise awareness if no one is thinking about these things. The third one is that petroleum and plastic use in inks. So most inks are actually made from a petroleum base, and basically are just a byproduct of the oil industry. This is just sort of how we have synthesized inks. There are different alternatives that we can look for, but it's not something people think of really, and I think it's not the most important part of your project. Ultimately, a material choice is going to be the most important part, as I'll talk about a little bit later. But it's still good to be aware that, what the composition of inks is. The fourth one, this is where we can start really actually making some serious choices, is harmful paper additions that impede recyclability. So basically what this means is that when we choose to make certain choices, like putting foiling on our cards, putting laminate on business cards or paper products, these kinds of decisions, putting aqueous coatings, another good one, this UV spot coatings, these kinds of things, these additions to the paper just really make it more difficult to recycle the paper afterwards, and increases the likelihood that it will end up in landfill, or it will contaminate a batch of paper recycling, or even at best just reduce the amount of recoverable fibers that exist. I'll also just throw in a quick sort of fun fact here, or myth debunk. There's some discussion that comes up occasionally whether or not recycled paper is more harmful to the environment because it uses chemicals. The truth is that so does virgin paper. Virgin paper production actually uses way more chemicals than recycled paper does, because after the wood becomes pulped, they have to remove this compound from the wood called lignin, and the lignin has to be removed for paper. It will completely destroy the paper and not be a viable product if it remains. And the only way to get that compound out of the wood is through a very chemically intensive process. So the question of chemicals for the creation of paper is pretty complex, and ultimately because the de-inking process is both a physical and a chemical process, there's just not as many chemicals used. And really the main issue is that while chemicals can be let loose, so to speak, into the environment, it's up to the paper mill or the recycling facility to ensure that their wastewater is being properly disposed of. So to touch quickly on the different spot UV laminates and foils, basically spot UV coatings are often marketed as being aqueous coatings, which basically means that they have a water base, and that when they're put on the paper, the water will evaporate, leaving behind a resin. And the resin is sort of what looks shiny and is a little bit tactile and smooth when you touch it. That is actually plastic that was left behind. They call it a resin. They call it a synthetic resin. But I looked up patents on Google for what the actual coating is, and it's just a plastic compound. So it's often marketed as being eco-friendly because it's water-based, and then the water evaporates to leave behind the material, but it's still plastic you're putting on your card, so it's not super sustainable. Laminates also, again, like this is a plastic layer that gets adhered to the business card, for example. It's often called soft touch matte coatings. I personally have a pet peeve with this one because it's really common in book covers now, but like as you touch them, as you touch the card or the book, as you read it or handle it, the oils from your fingers actually start to like interact with the plastic coating, and it becomes sticky over time, and it's gross. If you've ever touched it, like if you ever touched one of those books and it's like too sticky, you need to understand why. That's why. So like as a general thing, I think that's a no-go regardless. But it's really cheap, which is why people do it. It feels really nice when you first touch it. And foiling is the same. So basically the foil, it's a very thin layer, usually of aluminum, but there is a plastic layer that's used to adhere the foil to the paper. And there is also a plastic layer that often gets pulled off the product, the foil, in order to adhere it. Now, I've heard from some foil companies that their foil is recyclable and it doesn't impede recyclability. However, none of them have been able to send me the studies that they say that they've done, like independent lab studies. So I'm just waiting for that. Like hopefully one of them will send me the studies one day. So if they end up sending the studies to me, potentially there are some companies with foil that can be recycled and don't wreck the recycling, but until I see the studies, I can't change my information. So that's why there's a little asterisk. And this has like recently come up for me in the last week. So that's why I wanted to bring it up. The thing with all of these is that like on Vistaprint, for example, where you can get the cheapest business cards possible, all of these things are extremely cheap add-ons to make your cards feel more luxurious or look more luxurious. And really, if they're that cheap, where are they coming from? Probably plastic. Actually, guaranteed plastic, but so this is what I was talking about before, improper disposal of effluent from paper mills or recycling facilities. This happens. There's a very famous case actually with Domtar paper that often reps themselves as being quite sustainable, and they are. I'm not trying to say they aren't, but in the early 2000s, they improperly disposed of their effluent, and it went into a river system and just started killing fish like en masse, and they had to pay a huge fine to the EPA. In the United States, it was like a huge Superfund cleanup site. There's lots of documentation on this, so I'm not like digging up some like obscure dirt or anything. They had to pay like something like $2.5 million. Oh yes, so effluent is basically the chemicals and other toxic waste compounds from either making paper, printing with the inks, any kind of like disposal, any kind of like toxic chemical or liquid substance coming from the creation of paper or printing. Usually they have systems in order to like basically capture and dispose of it properly, but that's expensive, and sometimes the systems break, or sometimes they just don't have them set up properly, or there's any number of reasons why a corporation would do things that don't necessarily benefit the planet. But basically, sometimes it breaks and it goes into the local ecosystems. Now, there's some printers and paper mills that literally never have this problem. They've never had an EPA Superfund cleanup. So, just some like tea for you on that one. Now, I'm not saying that you should never pick Domtar paper or anything. It's just they do have a history of that, which I think is important to know. Also, one time I did a talk at a conference, basically very similar to this talk, and a Domtar paper rep came up to me afterwards and was very mad at me for giving wrong information. But I have sources for everything. So if anyone wants a source for any particular slide, I can send it your way. And the last one is end of life for trash disposal of paper and plastics. This is definitely, I think, more of a consideration when you're looking at packaging. Packaging is so interesting because it really depends where your consumers live and what kind of recycling facilities are available to them. It's not the same everywhere, and it's definitely not the same in different countries. And I think this is kind of often overlooked, where sometimes certain sustainable solutions like compostable plastics are really sort of like put forward as being like these great new ideas that you can use for your packaging. You know, why not have a compostable plastic? You just send it to an industrial compostable facility, and surely everyone has access to that, right? But in Canada, there's only 2 industrial composters that can take compostable plastics. They're definitely not handling the entire amount of compostable plastics that exist in Canada. In the States, there's more, but like I think it was around 15 or 20 across the whole United States. So it's basically like what I'm getting at with this idea is just that like being aware of the logistics of recycling in different areas, especially if you're working with packaging, can be a really important piece of information to bring to your clients and be like, hey, did you know there's actually not many industrial compostable facilities happening in the place you want to sell this product to that's industrial compostable? Maybe we should consider something else because it's not going to be composted. All of this sucks. This is pretty grim for the first part of the presentation, I know, but we're gonna get into like the good stuff now of how we can actually like make good changes. And this is why I like bring back a callback to this this little framework I did, because you know, understanding the harmful side effects to all these different areas is how we can go on to make changes, which is what I'll talk about. And these kinds of, you know, impacts are happening even if you just pick a default stock from the printer and you don't know if it's recycled and you don't know if it has a forestry certification. You know, the choices are being made like automatically by default, and they're usually the default ones are the cheapest and therefore the most unsustainable options. But you know, it's not too hard to just investigate a little bit into different stocks and stuff, like choosing sustainably sourced paper. This is something that used to be a lot harder to do. But luckily, over the last like decade or so, there's been like amazing advances in recycled paper and different alternative fibers. So there's, you know, for alternative fibers, like I'm just geeked about this because there's like hemp paper, there's a Mohawk Renewal, it's like the brand name line. They do hemp paper, they do straw paper, and they do recycled cotton paper. So like literally recycled cotton t-shirts and jeans get turned into paper. For the straw paper, it's literally reclaimed straw from farmers' fields that would have traditionally been burned. And is then being turned into paper. And for the hemp paper, hemp is like super fast growing. I think it comes to maturity in around 30 days, has very low water energy requirement to turn into paper. And again, just really high quality stocks. You can see a little bit on the left-hand side of the graphic there that's like this sort of like dusky green color. All the stocks in this line are like naturally dyed. They don't put any kind of like artificial dyes into it. It's just the color of the like source fiber that they're feeding into the paper, which is so cool. So really exciting opportunities for very unique. Is toilet paper made from recycled paper truly body safe? I believe so. That's a like excellent question, but I believe so. They do generally run all of the recycled paper and especially like personal care products through like safety and like you know, toxin removal processes. So I'm pretty sure that the toilet paper is good for you. But I can double check on that. I'll do a follow up on Instagram. So Mohawk paper is, yeah, no worry, no problem. Mohawk paper is really cool, but there are definitely other options. So there's seed paper, which actually like has little seeds in it that you can plant afterwards after you use the paper. And it will grow like flowers or vegetables, which is neat. There's stone paper, which is made from stone, but like feels kind of like receipts, I guess. Actually, it's a little bit like waxy, but again, it's recyclable. Infinitely recyclable, and it's pretty cool. As a different option, it's being used in packaging these days. What else? I mean, there's really good recycled paper options, and there's also like different forestry certifications that you can look for, which I believe I have a slide on it later, but basically one of the main ones that you can look to is the FSC, or Forest Stewardship Council. Now they have 3 different certification options with that. And you're going to want to look for like either FSC recycled or FSC 100 instead of FSC mix, because FSC 100 and FSC recycled are either recycled or like as close to as possible guaranteed that it came from a sustainable source. But I can share more information on that, and I believe there's another slide as well. So for packaging, we can reduce and avoid and lightweight plastics when possible. This is a little bit what I was getting into earlier with the discussion of compostable plastics and whether or not that's viable, but sometimes it's really about just looking at the per grams of plastic that you're using in a certain piece of packaging. There are many industries out there that require plastic packaging in some capacity for food safe requirements or other kind of moisture barrier requirements. Unfortunately, we don't live in a world where everything can just be put into an alternative fiber. Fingers crossed one day we can have that. And there's some really cool alternative materials that are currently being worked on right now, but aren't actually industrially available yet. But hopefully in the next 10 years, we'll be able to have true plastic alternatives. But just really being able to talk to the packaging suppliers and discuss how much plastic is actually in different options that you're considering with your client, and of course what the prices are. We can prioritize plant-based inks. So this can come in the form of soy-based inks or vegetable-based inks. The soy-based inks and the vegetable-based inks are they're pretty cool. They have a brighter color contrast actually than other inks, but the percentages of soy or plant-based input that's going into them can change. There's certifications for soy-based ink and stuff, but there's not any actual regulation on what kind of percentages have to be required to have something be soy-based. So this could mean that it's literally 5% soy and then 95% petroleum, and it's a soy-based ink. So it's a little bit dicey there, but it's still, I think, a really good conversation to have, an interesting conversation to have with printers, with clients, discussing different options. Again, just making these kinds of truly alternatives, even if they're not perfect, become a little bit more normalized. There's also LJ ink, which is really cool and just coming onto the market in the last year or so. I have some samples from our printer, which I was looking behind me to see if I could grab. But I showed them off on my Instagram. I'm going to show them off on Instagram again and do some other cool blog post material about them. So more coming about that. But they are actually made from algae. It is really neat. It only comes in black. So that is a limitation, I guess, for now. But it truly looks nearly identical to a traditional black ink, which is really neat. And it's a little bit warmer toned in color, so a little bit more brown. But also the contrast on it for things like photography is much, much better than a black ink. So it actually can look really incredible on photographs. I have samples, but I will have to share that on a different platform at some point. Or at the end, I'll grab them and find it. So we can avoid the foiling, the soft touch mats, and the aqueous coatings. That's a great step. The good thing is that those are kind of cheap and overdone, and you don't really need to use them. If your client wants a level up, you can consider the different paper stock options. There's stocks made out of hemp and something different, a conversation starter for, say, business cards or marketing materials. You can use a embossing or debossing that changes the actual texture of the design as well. You can use die cutting. And yeah, this call will be available on YouTube after I get it uploaded. And I'll be sending out the replay to everyone, so you'll have access forever. And I'll also send the slides. So you can also use letterpress, which is pretty cool. And the die cutting, which is technically involves some waste because you're cutting a bit of the design off, but it looks pretty cool, and I think it's a better alternative having a little bit of paper be recycled from cutting it off into a cool design than using plastic on the card. So that's my recommendation. Sometimes, with these things, we can't always make great choices. We have to make compromises, and sometimes it's just making the best compromise possible. And we can research different paper mills and printers. The Domtar one is easy because you can literally type in Domtar Superfund Cleanup, USA, EPA. We've got a ton of information about it, but you can do a similar thing with other paper stocks and printers. You can read their annual reports and see what they're doing. Domtar is legally required to report on their Superfund cleanup, so you can see how that's going. They generally promote it as being a great environmental initiative, but it's only because they did something bad in the first place. but you can, look into different paper companies, see how sustainable they are, do sort of external research if there's been complaints from communities where those paper mills have been in. When I was doing some research for this before, I found just a lot of local articles talking about different paper mills and printing companies that were not necessarily handling their environmental regulations correctly, and just community members being upset about it, things that hadn't necessarily been taken to court or anything. That's always good to keep in mind. You're not always going to be able to make choices about all of these things, and it's certainly not expected that every designer for every project, for every paper, know all of these things, be able to make all of these choices. It's just not realistic. We don't have the mental capacity to make all those choices. So don't worry too much about that. It's more so just being able to go over the full scope of the problem here, instead of making you feel like you need to make each choice correctly, or you're a bad designer, you're not sustainable. And we can talk to clients about sustainable options. It's a really easy one. A lot of clients, in my experience, even if they're not coming to you directly for sustainable design, they're not opposed to discussing it. And in fact, even if they're asking for something unsustainable, like the soft touch matte coating on the card, sometimes just talking to them about it and explaining what it is and what the actual impact of that is, that their business card will turn into a single-use plastic, then they're like, oh, I don't want that. That's not, I just thought it felt nice. Often they're coming from a place of just a little bit of ignorance, which is fine. They don't have to know about those things. And so when you actually just explain to them and talk to them about it, they're more than willing to change. Sometimes they don't, but you can't win every battle. So yeah, here's some of the certifications that you can look for. So we've got the FSC. Indian Forest Friendly is a certification that is geared towards those old and endangered forests, so the ones that have 500-plus-year-old trees. So if it's got that stamp, it means that it didn't come from any of those trees. Rainforest Alliance is a great one, specifically for the Amazon rainforest, which is actually where a lot of deforestation is done for many reasons. So if that's got that stamp, it didn't deforest original forest there. Green E Energy Certified basically means that the paper stock was coming from a renewable energy or had carbon credits to offset the energy into renewable energy, which is pretty cool. Totally chlorine free means that they didn't use chlorine to bleach paper before it was sort of finalized and sent out, which is good. It decreases the amount of toxic effluent that exists. And you've got printed with soy-based inks. We talked about some of the legal issues with that, but it's okay. FSC ultimately is going to be the largest one you're going to find. It's worldwide. It's not perfect. There's some problems with it, but they're doing their best. It's really subject to individual countries and what regulation looks like there, and whether or not there's corruption. It's really just a bit of a mixed bag. In some countries, it's going to be excellent. In some, it's going to be not so great. But it's still a better choice than just true virgin fiber, which has no certification, because you can't even begin to imagine any kind of regulatory oversight that happens with that. If you're looking for some printer and paper recommendations, a really good place to start, I highly recommend checking out canopyplanet.org. They have both a printer ranking and a paper ranking. The printer ranking is for North America only, unfortunately, but the paper ranking for different sustainability criteria is for worldwide papers, and it's just a huge database. I thought about creating my own at some point, and then I realized that exists, and why rewrote the wheel? So 10 out of 10 resource, highly recommend checking it out. So where do we go from there? It's a lot of issues, a lot of things we can do. In my personal opinion, a design business is stronger with a set of ethics and values. In my experience, after taking the very scary dive to be a truly 100% sustainable designer, I have policies that my clients have to consider, sustainable design options with me and choose the best choice for their budget. And, there's actual things they sign in the contract about it. Clients have been excited. We've had clients come to us specifically because we were sustainable. They say things like, I've interviewed a bunch of other designers, and only you say, on your website, clearly you understand the same values that I have. I was looking for that. Now I want to work with you. And it can be a real value add to having clients pick you over different agencies or designers that they're potentially interested in, just having that values alignment. The truth too is that consumers for different products, they're actually wanting it. they are aware of animal welfare issues, plastic pollution issues, climate crisis issues. They're wanting to make more changes. I'll just skip ahead a little bit because I want to. Nope, I won't skip ahead. Too many slides away. Okay, sorry everyone. Truth is, consumers want it. We're going to get to some information about that in a little bit. There's actual statistics that they will pay more, that they're looking for purpose. You know, companies that have a purpose are more than just like a lifestyle brand. They really want companies to be putting full transparency and authenticity forward for sustainability, and they're willing to pay for it. Greenwashing is also like a very complex issue now. Part of what I wanted to get at here was the idea that back in the 90s, you used to see things that are just like green with trees. And, you know, obviously a bottle of Coke that's like green is not sustainable necessarily, or like some chemical cleaner that they made green, not sustainable. But now I think there's often a sort of like an approach that like sustainable design or sustainable products or brands can only be this sort of like hyper feminine, beige tone, like personal living sort of aesthetic. And I really think that's not true. And I think that's a missed opportunity, because I think any brand direction can be sustainable. And it's not necessarily about using the color green or like beige and like a script font and some trees or something. You know, there's different ways here that we can market sustainability. You know, we can either sort of like go into that like stylish elegance, like vegan, handmade, eco-friendly sort of marketing language, or, you know, we can have something that's a little bit more industrial, a little bit more rugged. There's studies that show that men don't want to wear or like carry reusable tote bags because they think it's too feminine. So this is kind of exploring that idea, because I think it's a missed opportunity for sustainable design and like brand aesthetics. You know, ultimately sustainable things are, you know, durable. They're going to be multi-purpose. They last years. This is something that you purchase once and then use again and again and again and again. If anyone is thinking about that one study that says that cotton bags are worse for the environment than plastic bags, talk to me later, because that's wrong. But basically, I think that there's a lot of opportunity for sustainable branding to be applied to any situation at any time. So yeah, 65% of a global study that was done basically shows that consumers want to buy from purpose-driven brands. This is going up in Millennial and Generation Z. The consumers, they want it more and more. They're willing to pay more and more. As Zoomers come into more purchasing and buying power, their desire to purchase from relevant brands that care about the environment goes up. And so part of this issue, I'm trying to speed up a little bit because I'm definitely running a bit over time, but it's hard for consumers to make these choices. There is a lot of greenwashing out there that's more complex than just like things being literally green. And in my opinion, this is also a role that us designers can play when we're discussing and working through sustainable design with our clients, helping them bring authenticity and transparency to their customers, to their website, to their audience. So in my opinion, like some of our ideas for transparency and authenticity. For transparency, they can track and report their carbon footprint. They can describe the packaging, the materials used, the kinds of compromises they had to make and why they had to make them. It's okay that you can't make a sustainable choice right away, but it's important to be transparent about that, so consumers and customers actually know why you had to make that choice and why a solution that's more sustainable actually isn't on the market in some situations. For authenticity, you can offset your carbon footprint, you can use minimally harmful materials, and again, just like work to set up a plan. If it's a food company that needs to use plastic, what's their plan to investigate alternative materials 2 years, 5 years down the road? Is this something that they care about? Being able to put that kind of information, those kind of goals out really helps, consumers understand the true lay of the land. I've seen comments on Instagram of like some people not understanding that actually sending things out in glass is like really sustainable, like a glass refill system where they just send the refills in like a little packet. The glass is like a one-time purchase. You know, that's fabulous, but there is a lot of misinformation about, you know, different options and what is actually viable. So really kind of the core thesis here is that being able to help your clients educate their consumers about the sustainable aspects of their business can really help their business grow, can actually help their business like succeed financially if they're targeting the right people. This is a great example of how to be a little bit more transparent. The example on the right is a package that's actually made from Mohawk straw. paper that's from a company called Bathing Culture. They do like bath products. But on their actual packaging, they've discussed about how 1% of their sales are donated towards the environmental and social justice programs. And they've talked about the actual paper stock that the box was made from, which is really cool. Consumers are looking for that, especially younger ones. Although I think I say younger, and probably we are all mostly millennials or Zoomers, but you know, say la vie. And then the second one is reduce, reuse, recycle. This is from Seeds Company. Seed, they sell like a probiotic. It doesn't matter what they sell, but basically they have worked to create a very, very sustainable system for their packaging, including using some cutting edge alternative materials such as this foam that's actually made from mushrooms. There's actually no like plastic. I actually don't know what styrofoam is made from. I just know that it's bad. I'm gonna assume it's an oil product. Actually, I know it's an oil product, but I don't know exactly like the chemical composition. But it can't be recycled. It can't be like, it's styrofoam. It sucks. But this is like a mushroom-based quote unquote styrofoam that's not actually styrofoam, but it offers the same kind of physical protection. Very cool. They actually like list their packaging partners on their website so that other people, other companies can do similar things as well. Very cool to see. Love that kind of transparency. Basically, the gist of this slide is that by being able to put that transparency on packaging, you're really being able to communicate to customers of your brand image and brand positioning. And this is what we do as designers, helping brands show off who they are and be able to connect with their consumers. So I really think that this is like a super valuable value add that we can provide to our clients. This is a little graph that basically just shows that for packaging, the maximum percentage increase that anyone can put on their packaging for having to be more sustainable and that people will pay for is 15%. But that's a pretty good margin of margin. It's a good margin to play with. Basically, you can be a little bit more brave with that option, knowing that over 50% of people will pay more for a 10% packaging cost increase if you choose to invest in that. Basically, it's just considering your impact as a designer. I really think that not all of these things are possible to do for every single project, but being able to pick and choose what could potentially have the most impact for each project is valuable, and what your client might most be receptive to. As a sustainable studio, we put in place different policies. You can see these on our website if you want to check them out. But basically, putting in different policies about the kinds of paper stocks we use, about the things we evaluate, the things that we care about, and also, we do vet our clients. I'm luckily in a privileged position where I can do that. I know that not everyone can, but if a client comes to us that is from an industry we don't want to work with, I won't work with them. And if they're not willing to work with me on sustainable choices, then I won't work with them. It's something that I bring up very clearly in our first inquiry calls and ensure that they're on the same page as me. Ultimately, design isn't going to save the world, but I do think it's our responsibility to try. And I also think that if we want to work towards a better future where things are more equitable and just, and where we aren't in a climate crisis, I think that it's important to be designing right now for that kind of future. In the future, hopefully most paper will be recycled, and we'll have, less plastics in our world. And I think that we should be, when we can, embodying those principles now so that hopefully that future will come around. The last part I will quickly promote is we have a course. It's our only paid offering, and basically is like, I think there's over like 13 hours of like dense lecture content on like each of these topics that go into real detail. There's like checklists. There's like a Geneva private community. It used to be on Slack, but Slack started deleting messages after 90 days. So I moved it to Geneva. There's like a ton of resources. There's also like 20 hours of like podcast style lectures and stuff. The course is $300, but there's a code going on until next Friday, the 3rd, March 3rd, where you can get $50 off with the code recession, because things are really expensive right now. And I know the course isn't like necessarily the most expensive course out there, but we really tried to price it accessibly just because that's really important to me. If I could have it for free, I would. Unfortunately, I still need to pay bills under capitalism, but hopefully one day it could be free. I just really hope that one day all designers can be sustainable designers, and that, you know, it's not just me. I don't have to call myself a sustainable designer. And I think it's like of some moral value to both do free content like here, but then also like be able to, I lost my train of thought. I want to help other designers be more sustainable like us. The course is basically just like the sum total of like all of our research over the years and goes into like crazy detail about everything. There's no scarcity marketing. The course is evergreen. It doesn't matter when you sign up. If now's not the right time, it's okay. I'm like anti-marketing the course, but like don't want anyone to go into financial like debt for this. You know, I know things are really expensive right now. There is a payment plan that the coupon code works on for, I believe it's $100 a month for 3 months. There's no markup on it. The other thing that's happening is we do these like community coaching calls. So those are going to be happening on Fridays, although subject to change the time if people want. But they're basically just a community call where answer your questions about the course, talk about current events, sustainability, etc. If anyone has any questions about that, I can answer as well. But if you go to greengraphicdesigncourse.com, there's just a lot more information that you can snoop out and decide if it's a good fit. And that is it. Thank you. I'll do questions now, if there are any, or general chatting or whatever. Feel free to turn on your video or audio if you want to, or type in the chat, whatever is most comfortable for anyone. And I will be sending out the recording and all the slides and everything after. So don't worry about that. Thank you, Coco. Yeah, so there is a certification. Basically, it's like optional. So there's like a series of quizzes for each unit that we have in the course. And if you complete the quizzes, we'll send you the certification. It's not designed to be something that's like really, really hard to get. It's just, you know, to show that you were working through the units and stuff. We kind of figured that like if people are signing up for the course and like bother to go through the quizzes, then, you know, you're not going to be abusing the certification, basically. We're not large enough to have that be a problem. Thank you, Francesca. And do I have experience with sustainable and digital design? Yes, to some degree. I'm not like a true expert in it. I mean, like I know how to like, you know, compress my images and video for the web and like reduce file size and stuff. If you're looking for more information about that, I highly recommend checking out Blue Raspberry Design. She is a good friend of mine, but she really focuses on sustainable web design. She's also working her way to a course right now, so that's really exciting for her. She's launching soon. So yeah, highly recommend checking out her website, Instagram, if you're looking for more about that. I leave that to her excellent expertise. Thank you, everyone. I'm so glad people enjoyed. Trying to think if I have any interesting stories to share in this time. I definitely saw an article recently about how Impressionist paintings were seemingly inspired by the increased smog that was happening at the time due to the Industrial Revolution. And so it actually wasn't an artistic choice. It was a literal representation of the smog that was happening in cities like London. So that's really cool. I really want to read more about that. Thank you, everyone. Also, to comment earlier, fungi is really cool. It's one of the coolest materials out there in terms of like innovative things happening. It can replace styrofoam. They're working on eating different plastics in like lab environments, which is pretty cool. It can be like a seafood alternative. Like there's just so much that can be done with different mycelium structures. It's really neat. Seaweed is also a really cool one. Obviously, there's the algae ink, but then also there's, which I can grab the algae ink. That is a thing I can do. There's seaweed based plastics, which are truly not going to be chemically identical to traditional plastics. They're going to hopefully be the true sustainable option that we've been looking for as a plastic substitute. It's not on the market yet. There's a company called Sway working on it. I'm like eagerly with bated breath waiting for them to launch something that is industrially viable. Okay, here's some of the algae stuff. This was sent to me from a North American printer called Hemlock. And here's like, I'm gonna see if I can get this so we can see the difference here. The pictures are actually split with a triangle. So let's see if I can. So this side up here is the black ink, and then this side down here is the algae ink. And I'm not really sure you can see a difference on here. I might be just kind of making a fool of myself. Oh, maybe it's more obvious from back here. I don't know, but it's very similar. The algae ink is just a little bit more brown. Maybe this page would be a little bit. Yeah, so you can see a little bit the difference there in the different color tones, but you can barely tell, especially on this one. It's really neat. I'll be putting more information on this. Oh yeah, you can sort of see here with the different color tones, the black, and one being a little bit more brown. It's really hard to tell. You have to really look at it in the sunlight. I've been waiting for like the sun to come out so that I can take like a good photo of it for Instagram, and not just have it be like, look, it's identical to the black, because it nearly is, but like it's a little different, and I want to showcase that that result because I think it's really neat. They gave me this little pamphlet here as well. It says that 145-pound bucket of algae ink used in print production effectively removes 130 pounds of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and saves the consumption of 22.5 pounds of fossil fuels. That's pretty cool. We have a question though. Do you have any advice for anyone living in an area where it's difficult to find sustainable printing and packaging? It's hard. Not everyone has all of the opportunities that people in larger cities might. I know that I live in a smaller city as well, and it can be more difficult to make some of these choices. Even this printer is like, I live on an island and they're on the mainland. There are some online printers that do have sustainable options, so that's always something you can look into. There's no shame in using an online printer. Moo.com is a great option, especially for business cards. Not all of their paper stocks are sustainable, but they do have a business card option that is made out of recycled cotton, which is very cool. There are also some online printers that have hemp paper, that have bamboo paper stocks. That was one I forgot to mention, but there are definitely online options that you can explore for different projects. It just might take a little digging. Hopefully that helps. It's not a perfect answer. We're not all in situations where we can like make the best choices, which is difficult. And I really don't want anyone to feel like overwhelmed or like, oh, it's too much. Like I could never make those kinds of choices, because it's really just about like doing the best that you can in any moment. Like even if the conversation with your client is only like, hey, would you want to consider a recycled paper stock? And they're like, no. And you're like, oh, okay, it's better for the environment though. And they're like, I don't care. Like you still like went out on a limb and like talked to them about it. And it gets easier with time. You get more information and knowledge, and it's easier to bring these things up and talk to clients about it. When I first started, I basically emailed all the printers that were local to me, and there were like 5 or 6, and like one replied to me. It wasn't Hemlock because I wasn't emailing printers on the mainland, but one replied to me and they were like, oh, absolutely, I'd love to share our sustainable options with us or with you. Do you want to come in and get some stock samples and stuff? And that was really cool. And that can be a really great relationship to build. But yeah, literally one replied to me out of like 6. Their loss. Honestly, I then exclusively took my local clients to that one printer. So they lost out on some money because they didn't reply to my email. That's how it goes. But printers can be an amazing resource with keeping you up to date with like cutting edge stuff. Like literally, the Hemlock representative I know just emailed me and was like, hey, you want this? And I was like, yes, I want this. This is so cool. I will tell everyone about it. Yeah. I will definitely post on Instagram about it. Also, for people that are like more interested in like free educational content, I have started and I'm actually maintaining a Substack, which is like, I think I just called it Green Graphic Design Substack or something. It's like linked on my Instagram and my web stuff. And I'm doing like more long form pieces, like research pieces on it, as well as just sharing like cool sustainable design things. And I've really been enjoying that, especially in contrast to Instagram. Instagram's like nice and all, but it's also kind of bad for mental health. So I use it in doses. But like Substack has been really, really fun, and I've been really enjoying writing content there, educational content there, because I do think that like it's important to not just have a paid offering. And so yeah, I highly recommend checking out both the Instagram and Substack, although Substack's my favorite right now, so that's what I recommend. Am I hiring? I wish. Honestly, we're such a small company, and with the economic downturn, we're not doing this, like, we're not doing bad financially. It's not what I'm trying to say, but it's definitely just like leaner times. I wish I was hiring though, seriously. It would be so incredible to be able to work with like different people from the community and stuff, but I'm really glad that you enjoyed the presentation. It makes me so sad to say to people I'm not hiring. I hope to one day, hopefully things like, you know, improve. And yeah, is there any sustainable international printer business? Are you talking just for, like, for printer recommendations for different countries, or is there like a database? Can you expand on your question a wee bit? So it's really complicated. I honestly, like, I'm not really able to recommend like a printer in every country. If you're, I generally, what we generally try and do when we're working internationally is like find printers that are local to the client. Sometimes the client has the most information about printers, and then we can help them vet different ones by asking them, hey, what are the printers like have you used before, or like are around you? Sometimes it's just like trying to get the Google algorithm to like reorient to the country you're trying to find them in, or packaging. And yeah, unfortunately there's not like really an easy system for that unless you're in North America, in which the Canopy Blue Line ranking is really good, but that's like literally just North America, which is not the whole world by any means. Sorry, I wish I could help more, but it's so complicated in different countries. I will say, like, on the printing in different countries note, this is a bit complicated to get into, but like there's certain Pantones that used to be used with different heavy metals, and so you'll sometimes see this going around the green design space, that if you use certain Pantones, then they're bad for the environment. In most countries, this isn't true anymore, but sometimes in certain countries, if the regulatory bodies aren't there, the colors are actually made with the heavy metals still. It's unlikely to happen, but it does happen. They have found traces of the heavy metals in recycling facilities from those, and landfills from those colors. But it's really an issue with like certain printers in certain areas of the world that are just like choosing to have a cheaper like supply for their ink instead of doing it without heavy metals, because, you know, mining is an industry that unfortunately exists. My hot take. Unfortunately, mining exists. We need mining though, so complicated. I'm just rambling at this point. Does anyone else have any questions? I suppose we're getting pretty close to time. Thank you everyone for joining though. I'm not gonna wrap up just yet, but you know, I really appreciate it. There's actually like a much bigger turnout here than I was expecting, which is really cool. It was a lot of fun. I'd absolutely love to give talks to university students. I've done it in the past, and I would totally give it again. Please feel free to email me. I'll just like drop my email in the chat. Fancy, but yeah, please feel free to email me. I'm definitely happy to do that. General ideas or even more specific topics. No problem. I'm really glad you enjoyed it so much as to want to recommend it to your students. Thank you, Jessica. Okay, well, I think I'll wrap up here, but please, if anyone has questions, feel free to email me or message me on Instagram or anything. You enjoy your day too, Renee, and snow. I wish we had snow here. I love snow. But I'm gonna go for a walk as well. So it looks really nice outside. And thank you everyone for coming. I hope you all have wonderful days. And feel free to message me if you have any like comments, questions, whatever. I'm more than happy to answer any of them. That goes for the people watching this replay too. Feel free to contact me and I will answer in as best detail as I can. Thank you so much, everyone. I'm going to close out the recording now. Bye.